Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. For centuries, leaving Earth was just an impossible fantasy. Literally a myth told around campfires. But today, we're tracing the incredible journey of how humanity actually pulled it off. We're going to see exactly how we took fanciful poetry and transformed it into the explosive, hard physics needed to reach the stars. It is wild to think about how we went from ancient storytelling to calculating the precise mathematical formulas required to shoot giant metal cylinders into the freezing vacuum of space. So, how exactly did we bridge that gap? Because before we had orbital mechanics, all we really had was pure imagination. How did we cross the chasm from just dreaming about alien visitors to actually building the tools to go find them? Even without grasping the natural laws governing the universe, early humans still had this deep primal urge to explore the heavens, and they relied on these elaborate tales of ambitious heroes trying to conquer the skies with whatever tools they could conjure up in their minds.
I mean, our ancestors were completely obsessed with the sky. Think about the Greek myth of Icarus, right? Paying the ultimate price for flying too close to the sun with wax wings. Or the ancient Indian epic, the Ramayana, which detailed heroes literally ascending into the heavens. Obviously, these weren't engineering blueprints, but they were absolutely crucial. They were the first sparks of human ambition that laid the psychological groundwork for everything that was going to come next.
Now, that ambition hits a massive turning point in the Renaissance. When early stargazers finally pointed the first telescopes upward, they completely shattered the old dogmas. Suddenly, planets weren't just these glowing, untouchable deities in the sky. They were physical, mappable destinations. And as human knowledge about nature grew, those fantastical, mythological visions really started to give way to rigorous observation and a massive thirst for actual mathematical truth.
Enter the scientific heavyweights. Copernicus proved Earth wasn't the center of the universe, Kepler mapped out the planetary orbits, and Newton finally unlocked the physics of gravity and motion. Actually, Newton realized this totally wild concept. He figured out that if you fire a projectile fast enough, it won't just fall back down. It will fall around the Earth, endlessly. Boom! The concept of the artificial satellite is born. Space travel wasn't magic anymore. It was just a matter of mastering these universal laws of physics.
But hey, mastering those physics was tough, even for early science fiction. Take the 19th century and Jules Verne. He famously imagined shooting astronauts out of a giant lunar cannon. Which is a fun idea, sure, but scientifically, completely lethal to the crew. Real-world engineers quickly realized that to actually survive the trip and maneuver in a vacuum, a spacecraft couldn't just be a dumb bullet. It had to carry its very own explosive propulsion system.
And that brings us to a very important number. 7.9 kilometers per second. Just to wrap your head around that, traveling that fast is like crossing the entire city of London in the blink of an eye. That's the precise escape velocity required to perfectly balance centrifugal force against Earth's gravity. Without the atmosphere there to slow it down, a ship moving at that speed essentially falls around the Earth indefinitely. But getting anything that heavy to go that fast, that required a totally new kind of engine.
Now, solid gunpowder rockets, those had been around since ancient China, but they have one fatal flaw. Once you light them, that's it. You can't turn them off. To actually travel through space, engineers had to invent the liquid fuel rocket. By isolating the propellants into separate internal tanks, astronauts finally got the ability to throttle their thrust or even shut down the engines entirely, which gave them total precise control over their flight path.
It is basically a marvel of controlled chaos. You have these incredibly powerful turbine pumps that force a liquid fuel and an oxidizer into a combustion chamber. And when they meet, it creates this continuous, violent chemical combustion. Because of Newton's third law of motion, blasting those high-pressure, high-speed exhaust gases out of the bottom nozzle generates the immense backward thrust you need to literally cheat gravity.
But man, the engineering trade-offs here are just brutal. For instance, liquid hydrogen is incredibly lightweight and generates massive exhaust speeds. Great, right? But keeping it condensed as a liquid requires chilling it down to a mind-numbing negative 253 degrees Celsius. So engineers end up having to build these massive, heavily insulated flying thermoses, constantly battling the immense weight of the tanks against the actual efficiency of the fuel.
So, figuring this out really becomes this massive chemical puzzle. Do you use something like nitric acid and hydrazine because they're compact and easy to store in smaller tanks at room temperature? Or do you look way into the future with atomic energy, using nuclear reactions to instantly superheat liquid propellant? Because at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is always the exact same: maximum exhaust speed with the absolute minimum fuel weight.
Okay, so once you actually master all that explosive thrust, you could finally park artificial satellites safely above the atmosphere. We're talking past the 150-kilometer mark. If you go any lower than that, atmospheric friction just drags you right back down. But past that line, the vacuum is so thin that even meteors don't burn up. It is the perfect, silent real estate for massive space stations, forcing us to master the weird duality of living in total weightlessness while figuring out simulated rotational gravity.
And here's a fun fact. As we push further out into the solar system, the math actually throws us a bit of a bone. Escaping the moon's gravity well, for example, only requires about 1/20th of the energy it takes to leave Earth, since its gravity is just 1/6 of ours. This makes launching return vessels vastly easier, even if just surviving in that harsh, vacuumy environment makes every single physical task on the surface a grueling challenge.
But true interplanetary travel? That completely shatters our sci-fi tropes. You can't just point your nose at Mars and hit the gas in a straight line. Because both planets are constantly racing around the sun at completely different speeds, navigators basically have to thread a cosmic needle. It becomes this massive game of patience, plotting and coasting along complex elliptical trajectories, timed so perfectly that your ship and Mars arrive at the exact same point in the void at the exact same moment.
So, look at what we've accomplished. We actually did the impossible. We translated ancient campfire myths into the cold, hard mathematics of liquid combustion and elliptical orbits. But mastering the physics of spaceflight? That just opens the door to a much, much heavier question. Now that we finally have the keys to this massive clockwork universe, what, or maybe who, is waiting out there for us in the dark?